In the previous episode, How to Be a Successful Real Estate Negotiator Part 1, we talked about how to ask the right questions and what to listen for. In this Part 2 episode, we are going to learn how to color code the seller so that we can speak to that seller in their own language. This will up our chances of winning the negotiations and achieving a win-win for both parties. Learning to color code my sellers took my negotiations to a whole nother level. Once I learned to speak to my sellers in their language, I made more money. I was more successful more often. So the better you get at this, the better your income will be. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about what is color coding, how do you speak to your seller in their language, and then I'm going to tell you a little story about my first color coding experience and how it worked out. So what is color coding? Before you can effectively negotiate, you need to learn how to speak to this seller in their language. And to do that, we need to figure out how they're wired. How do they view the world? How do they assimilate information? What form of communication works best for that seller? You figure these things out and your negotiation is going to go a lot smoother. Next, I'm going to tell you how to talk to them in that language and what these colors mean. But do me a favor, if this is interesting to you, hit that like button and share this episode and be sure to subscribe. All right, we've got the colors: red, yellow, blue, green. What do they mean? If I'm talking to a red is probably, when I ask him what he does for a living, he might be an engineer, an architect, someone that deals in a lot of tiny numbers and where everything counts. If I'm dealing with a red, then I'm going to need to speak to this person in numbers and facts that they can hold in their hand. Spreadsheets would be good for a red. Diagrams would be good for a red. Anything that would show evidence would be good for a red. You getting my drift so far? So what's a yellow? A yellow lives for today. They don't care about the future. They don't care about what happened in the past. They're not trying to make anybody else happy. They're just trying to make themselves happy, and they're only interested in today and immediate gratification. How fast can you get them the money? They might not even be interested in the amount of money, but they are not worried about the future. They're not worried about anyone else. They're just worried about themselves and now. Learn to talk to them in that language. Blues are very giving. They're charitable. If you talk to someone who spends 2 or 3 days a week volunteering at the church, he's likely going to be a blue. Start talking to them about how you can help the neighborhood. How when you sell this to an owner finance person, you're going to move this person from out of being a renter to being an owner. These are people that want to give back to the world and are not necessarily so interested in what they're going to get out of it. They want to know that it's going to be good for everyone around them and for the community at large, maybe the environment, whatever. They're pretty touchy-feely and they are not in it for just themselves, and they're not in it just for the money. And that brings us to the greens. Who are the greens? Well, there's only one guy left. He's the guy that is interested in the money. He wants the money. I don't know if it's price or interest rate or monthly payments or cash up front, but this guy wants the money. He wants the money. He wants to do something, but he wants to be smart about it. He wants to make sure that he's not making a foolish move financially. So you're going to have to show this person why their decision is going to be good for them financially. And there's your green. Learn to speak to your reds, your blues, your yellows, your greens in their language. And now for that story I promised you. I was talking to a man who was an expert in color coding. Actually, I was interviewing him. And we went through this interview and I found it very fascinating. And I thought it was a terrific idea. Because I'm pretty good at asking those questions. I'm pretty good at listening, and I know what I'm listening for. And I would be able to size people up pretty quick, I thought. So we had this long conversation. He talked a lot about it. He introduced my audience to, it's really a deep subject. I mean, usually people have a primary color, they have a sub-color, and there could be all these variations, and it could get very technical. I chose to keep it simple for myself, and I'm choosing to keep it simple right now here with you. Because just on the simple, on the surface, does a lot of good in my negotiations. It's changed everything. So when I hung up from talking to this man for about an hour and 15 minutes, my alarm went off on my phone, and it was telling me that I needed to call this seller, that I've been trying to buy that house now for about 8 months. Every month I call, and he never makes a move to sell it or not to sell it. Now here's their story. They work almost 7 days a week at the church, volunteer. And someone at the church gave them a house because their daughter was on their 7th child, and she didn't know who the father was for any of the 7 children. Someone at the church felt sorry for them because they're living in this tiny 3-bedroom house there was 3 other kids, plus this daughter, plus now a 7th baby on the way, and the husband and the wife. So this house was very cramped. Someone at the church gave them a big house. And they had moved out of the house that I wanted to buy, the little 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, about 1,300 square feet. They had moved out of it, but it had been vacant for the 8 months I've been trying to buy it. And I never can get this man to sell the house. The house was all but free and clear. I think there was a tiny few $1,000s owed on it. They're living in the big house, and this house is empty. I had just had a conversation with this man about color coding. What color do you think my seller is? Well, he was obviously a blue. Very giving, very worried about everyone around him. The very fact that he didn't kick this daughter out of the house and excommunicate her, not after the 4th baby where she didn't know who the father was, not after the 5th baby where she didn't know the father, not after the 6th, and now that she's having a 7th baby, still hanging with his daughter and taking care of all these babies, more and more and more of them. This is a very giving man. This is a person who is blue. They were blue 7 ways to Sunday. So I decided to start talking to this man in the language of blue. And it wasn't really hard because I had someone who wanted that house. And that person really couldn't afford to live in that neighborhood. But their parents lived in that neighborhood, and they needed the parents to take care of their child while they went to work right down the street from that neighborhood. Now, as it was right now, my client that wanted to buy the house was way on the other side of town. And I said, that story is going to resonate with my blue seller. So I called him up immediately after this conversation with the color code master, and I decided to try it. I talked to my seller. Hey, Mr. Smith, how you doing? This is Mitch. It's me again. I know, it's like the 8th month in a row I've called you, right? You know, you probably don't want to sell the house because, for whatever reason, and it's none of my business why you don't. But I thought that I would talk to you about this customer I have and this family that really needs a house in this part of town. I told him that my customer, my prospect lived on the other side of town. I told them that they had children and they had to bring the children to the parents, and the parents lived in this neighborhood. And so if they owned a house in this neighborhood, this would make things easy because their job was also right outside this neighborhood. And that if these people could get into this house, that it would change their lives. The other part was they can't really afford to live in this neighborhood. So we're going to have to get them, I'm going to have to get the house at a price that I can afford to sell it to them and not be at the market price. Well, within an hour and a half, I had contracted that house and was headed to a closing in a couple of days. It was amazing. I had been talking to the blue in the color of green. I was telling him, the house is free and clear. When you sell it to me, you're going to have all this money in the bank. He didn't care about money. He cared about that family, those little children being able to be with the parents, the adults having an easy time getting to the job and taking care of the daycare, and that they were going to move from being a renter to an owner, and that they really couldn't afford it and they wanted to help. And that's what did. I talked to my blue seller in the blue language instead of the green language, and it changed everything. So there you have my story. So I'm going to invite you to check out my book, My Life in 1,000 Houses, 200 plus ways to find bargain properties. Well, you will hear plenty of stories just like the one you heard about my blue buyer. You just go to 1000houses.com/free-stuff. Scroll down till you see the books and pick it. It's my number 2 book. It's the second book that I wrote. And it's dealing with the question that I got asked most often after the first book, which was, how in the world do you find so many houses, Mitch? So I decided to sit down and write that book. My Life in 1,000 Houses, 200 plus ways to find bargain properties. Check it out. And I will see you at the next episode. Come on.